Legend of Grimrock has to be one of the most important gameplay experiences of the first half of the 2010s, and it seemingly came out of nowhere, at least as far as mainstream gaming was concerned. It is a passion-fueled, retro-inspired first-person dungeon crawler launched back in 2012. The small Finnish team from Almost Human citing titles like Eye of the Beholder and Ultima Underworld as their inspiration, and you can easily see this in the end product.
But is passion, skill, and great inspiration enough to make Legend of Grimrock a classic?
The story literally drops your 4-person party at the top of Grimrock Mountain, a legendarily impervious prison. However, you are absolved of all your crimes once you're dropped in, the catch being that in order to enjoy your freedom, you need to make it out alive. On your way down, you'll have to think your way through increasingly complex puzzles and fight through a number of varied enemy monsters. Your party will gain experience as they slash, bash, stab, shoot, and magic their way through the enemies, while also finding slightly better equipment as they traverse the mountain's layers upon layers of levels. I should note that items are very hard to find in Grimrock, and the best ones are almost exclusively available after solving optional puzzles. This means the game has boatloads of optional content, also known as secrets. Some of them can be as small as a hidden button on a wall, whilst others require you to do any number of actions so as to gain access to a previously inaccessible room. The main emphasis is the dungeon crawling and puzzle solving aspect, but the game also offers a satisfactory amount of customization options when it comes to your party's makeup, as well as to each class's individual development. There are 3 classes: Fighter, Rogue, and Mage.
The most classic of classic RPG classes. There was a lot of class in that one.
Each of them has 5 linear skill trees that you can invest your leveling points into. Considering the scope of the game, this allows for varied and repeated playthrough experiences. However, one tip I can offer: if you're running with 2 fighters in your party, make sure you don't specialize them on the same weapon. There is only one best choice in the game for each type of weapon, so make sure you do the most damage by getting the best of 2 worlds. There are 4 races to choose from: humans, who in the spirit of D&D are the best middle ground jack of all trades race. They can take on and do well in any class. Minotaurs, who as you might expect are really powerful fighters. Lizardmen.
State your first name, your last name, and occupation.
Lizardman, and Lizardman.
Who are sneaky, stealthy, and stabby. And insectoids, who are said to be the best mages possible.
I am the lone locust of the apocalypse. Think of me when you look to the night sky.
Seeing as how the game is deeply focused on the dungeon crawling experience, the stat and skill system is fairly minimalistic. Your characters will have each 4 stats, access to 6 skills, and possibility of taking 2 traits at creation. Despite this rather low number of things to keep track of, the game also is pretty serious about your party's survival in the dungeon, so your inventory space, carry weight, and each character's hunger will play an important role in your survival strategy through the many levels of the mountain. Each character's carry capacity will depend on their race, class, and stats, and seeing as how dungeon crawling is very energy intensive,
it's the cardio of the fantasy genre after all.
They'll need to eat from time to time in order to be at their optimum for ass kicking. This means that you always have to occupy inventory spaces and take up carry capacity with foodstuffs.
No mention what happens to all that food after you eat it, but that's a different sort of gameplay feature that no one really seems to delve into.
One of the few ways in which you can regain health and energy is to sleep. This is probably the cheapest and most easily accessible method of regeneration.
It's also the way in which the bare-bones story of the game gets started. You didn't think it was just as easy as you reaching the final level and then going out the doors. Oh no, nothing of the sort.
There has to be a big baddie at the end. Besides the opposite being anticlimactic as hell, it won't keep in step with the spirit of the old games that the developers channeled for Legend of Grimrock. The other possibility for regaining health and energy has to do with making and drinking potions. As you explore the levels of Grimrock, you will occasionally find some plants, which you'll be able to turn into potions once you find a couple other useful things. However, you'll never find enough ingredients for the potions to become OP, so I suggest you save them for those particular tough fights.
Ah, mother's milk.
But a more common yet situational option will be these handy dandy life crystals you'll find throughout the dungeon, which will replenish your party's health and mana as well as revive your dead comrades if they so happen to be dead.
It happened to me more than once to get 3 of my party members killed as we entered the new level, and then managing to backtrack with the final survivor to the previous level's life crystal to resurrect them all.
In order to further uphold the spirit of its old school ancestors, Legend of Grimrock offers the options of playing it without an automap feature, which doesn't necessarily make it more difficult, but it will make it more time consuming since you'll have to keep track of where you're going and where you've been.
With a pencil and paper. I know, scary.
Likewise, there are options that will not let you know what properties your items have or how much damage you're dealing, in case you're into that. The dungeon levels are laid out on a very simple and easy to grasp square grid, the movement of both your party and enemies being dictated by it. This is a big part of the combat in this game.
Combat is real time, but it's the type of real time where attacks have a cooldown period, so the rate at which you click the attack button doesn't really matter that much. However,
the speed and ability with which you maneuver your party around your enemies so as to avoid taking massive amounts of damage will be the decider in many fights between continuing or quick loading.
Wherever space allows for it, I suggest you do the dungeon cha-cha, as I call it.
Moving back and forth to avoid enemy attacks.
Let's just take a step back. No, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Take a step forward. Now take a step back. Step forward. And a step back. And then we're cha-chaing.
Will you stop it?
And of course, if you have a lot of space at your disposal, moving in a square pattern around your enemies will allow you to hit them on their sides or backstabbing the motherfuckers. The dungeon has a satisfactory diverse array of enemies for you to contend with, starting from giant snails and increasing in threat and challenge as you delve deeper into the mountain. You get some of the classic dungeon crawler enemies like giant spiders, walking mushroom things, and skeletons, but there's also weird elementals, flying things, and the occasional ogre.
Unrelated. Is it just me, or is the movement of the skeletons modeled on the undead guards from the Mummy movie?
The type of movement allowed by the grid is also relevant when it comes to solving time-sensitive puzzles, seeing as how you can still move in any direction regardless of where you're facing. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not all easy pickings and you won't simply glide through the dungeon levels. There will be situations in which the puzzles are rather convoluted and the various hints that you find on occasion don't help that much. You will most likely find yourself at one point or another frustrated enough to check a walkthrough because you want to continue with the game, but you won't be willing to spend 2 more hours pacing through the same goddamn corridors not knowing where and what to do.
Sometimes some things are clear, sometimes not so much.
Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
I don't know if that was the goal of the developers or if at a certain point they were so into the game world that they thought some puzzles had obvious solutions.
When in fact they weren't so obvious, but to be honest, that's as much as I can criticize about the game.
The final boss battle offers a completely different type of challenge than the rest of the game, and this is very well represented by what the dungeon's big baddie actually is, but I won't spoil that particular reveal. I will say that once you defeat it, you can only feel a sense of accomplishment having managed to finish the game and your efforts resulting in the destruction of the entire Grimrock mountain as well. Good times.
So now cometh the question, what maketh a video game a classic?
Some would say it's subjective, some would say it depends, and there's definitely something to be said about subjective classics, which is something I talk about in this series as well. But in order for a game to be an objective classic, it has to be considered to be good over a period of time, has to be remembered as such, and also it has to stand up to current day scrutiny. And I also consider that 10 years is the minimum period required for such a hindsight-based judgment to take place. In this case, it's been 10, so we're good. Somewhat surprisingly, Legend of Grimrock was not some kind of undiscovered indie gem of its time. The game proved that there was enough of an audience out there interested in actual gameplay mechanics as opposed to twitch muscle reflexes or hack and slashing for it to sell enough copies to allow the developers to make a sequel, Legend of Grimrock 2, which they launched in 2014.
So I guess I know what I'll be playing in 2 years' time.
Legend of Grimrock, being at the very minimal age of consideration for classic status, is obviously still very much playable nowadays, and it's such a smooth experience. I've played a few other first-person dungeon crawlers in the meanwhile, and none of them give me the same sense of smooth movement.
And by the way, it's also highly possible that none of those titles would have happened unless Legend of Grimrock was released, and pretty single-handedly sort of kinda resurrected the first-person dungeon crawler genre from the ashes.
While doing research for this video, I also discovered there are numerous mods for the game out there as well, including a complete overhaul of the entire game, which adds and enhances things. So I guess that means I'll have to play it at some point.
Legend of Grimrock is, without a shadow of a doubt, an objective classic. No matter how you slice it, and time will only solidify this idea going forward.
This video is dedicated to Toorum. Thanks for the hints and items, buddy. Always in my heart.
If you enjoyed this video, then by all means please do me a gigantic favor and like it and comment something hopefully relevant on it so as to feed the YouTube AI gods. My Is It a Classic playlist should appear on screen at a certain point. Checking out my Patreon page would also be highly appreciated, only if you have coin to spend. I've been Steven Nonsense, thank you very much for watching, have a great rest of your day, and hopefully you'll see me next time.